Hello, and welcome to another round of Jen's Live. My name's Liam Collier. I'm the Community Programs and Special Projects Manager at Goodman, and today we have another round of incredible stories written by some more of Deb Lewis's students. So I'm gonna go ahead and invite Deb up on the screen so that she can tell you about them.
Okay, yes, this time our theme was stories of traditions, family traditions or lack thereof. And that came from the play musical. It's kind of in between American Mariachi. And this group is North Center. We meet on Friday afternoons, and we do have a guest storyteller who is also in the family. Joining us from Willa Taylor's group, Kelly O'Connell. So you'll meet her a little bit later. And our first storyteller is Nancy Lerman with Tooth Fairy.
Good evening. It's just me and that doorknob, and this time it better work. Yanking a spool of black thread at a mama sewing box, I measure 6 feet. Staring in the bathroom mirror, I gingerly loop one end of the thread around my dangling upper right tooth. For weeks, I've been pushing that tooth backwards and forwards with my tongue, biting straight down on golden delicious apples, flossing with vigor. Nothing's worked. Back in my bedroom, I pace back and forth, stubbing my toe on the corner of my Easy Bake Oven. Raggedy Andy smirks as I trip over piles of Barbie clothes scattered across the floor. Scooping up Andy, I bash him against the bed. Wide-eyed, Patty Playpal quivers in the corner. If I had the courage, I'd just do it now. Heart pounding, I step up to the closed door and wrap the loose end of the thread around the doorknob 3 times. Pulling firmly, I secure a tight knot. Opening the door slightly, I step back until the thread is taut. I wait for what feels like a lifetime, then slowly begin to count. 1, 2, 3. Hand trembling, I push the door shut. 20 tries later, my tooth hasn't budged. Why isn't this working? Cowering behind the half-open door, I can't figure this out. Mom mutters to herself in the hallway. That child keeps her room like a pigsty. She walks past and slams shut the half-open door. I jolt back. Blood splatters everywhere. My tooth. Frozen, I stand pointing at a single bloody tooth dangling from the doorknob string. Racing in, Mom's eyes dart around the room. Her jaw drops when she spies the doorknob. Nancy, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. That night, I tucked the tooth in a white envelope under my pillow. Next morning, in its place is a crisp dollar bill, 50 cents more than the going rate. How'd the tooth fairy know that I had a rough go? At 16, I had 4 wisdom teeth extracted. And stayed overnight in the hospital. Back home, a $20 bill waited under my pillow. I've always had a soft spot for the tooth fairy. After a long hiatus, the tooth fairy recaptured my imagination. When our son Evan turned 6 and his teeth began to wobble, I knew it was time to call her back home. My husband Michael beelined to the bank for Washington golden dollar coins and $2 bills. At show and tell, the kids wanted Evan's tooth fairy to come to their homes. I found chocolate bars with fake Eurodollar wrappers and a mesh bag of pirate doubloons at World Market. From Chinatown came a handful of Chinese ancient coins with holes punched in their centers. Evan adored his international tooth fairy. One day, in an antique shop in South Haven, Michigan, I found yellow coins stamped with the words, "Good for trade in the Muskegon County Jail." Jail money, Michael cried. Next time, the Tooth Fairy's letter read, Dear Evan, I got picked up for shoplifting in Muskegon. I'm doing a stretch in the county jail. Still, I wanted to send you something for your latest tooth. Stay out of trouble, kid. Love, the Tooth Fairy.
I love it. The Tooth Fairy is almost as hip as you, Nancy. Thank you. Our next storyteller is visiting from Radcliffe Hall and is hailing from Hawaii. Francine Les with How I Became a Shiksa, which for those of you who don't know is the term for a non-Jewish woman.
Irv Lipman was a sweet, caring man. He fell in love with my mother and married her when I was 19. Mom had become a widow 3 years before, and Irv had been a widower for a bit longer than that. We moved into the house that he shared with his daughter, who was the same age as me. Well, the home I grew up in had a strong preference for joking, teasing, and having fun. I was raised in a home where holidays were about gathering and eating, not worshiping. The kind of home where I was forbidden to go out on high holidays, not because of the religious implications, but because my parents said others wouldn't respect me. The kind of home where I was forced to go to Sunday school, not because my religious education was important, but because it was socially expected. The kind of home that, after I threw enough tantrums, I was finally allowed to drop out of Sunday school. I won that one. It quickly became apparent that my stepsister had been raised quite differently. Her family kept a kosher home and practiced a much stricter form of Judaism. They diligently followed all the required rules for worshiping, Sabbath, and holiday observance. Rituals such as the Passover Seders were painstakingly long and very, very serious. I recall our first Passover Seder together as a blended family. My mother, Irv, 19-year-old me, Jim, my 22-year-old brother, my stepsister, Bob, my stepbrother, his wife, and their small son. The seriousness of the Lipman family was palpable. I was already feeling tense over fear of any inappropriate giggling that might emerge from me. How might they react? I should have seated myself more strategically at the table, but I found myself directly across from my brother. He and I could break into giggles and laughter over absolutely nothing but our eyes meeting each other. When it was time for him to read out loud, I heard a quiver in his voice. I knew damn well what that quiver was about. He was trying to suppress laughter, something I was quite experienced at. The smug look he gave me once he made it through his reading was a reminder that for my own good, I better stop looking at him. It was hard to ignore him, though. Right there across from me, I could see him from my peripheral vision, even as I tried not to. And it didn't help that he kept moving around and clearing his throat, doing anything to attempt me to get to look at him directly so that he could do his magic and set my giggling afire. I kept leaving the table as if I was helping out in the kitchen, but actually I was leaving the table because I was either bored or feeling an attack of giggles coming on, or sometimes both. As soon as I was reseated, the pattern would repeat. I was afraid to meet eyes with my mother as a wave of giggling swept over me. There she was, though, giving me a look that was a combination of amusement and scolding at the same time. I actually think she was trying not to laugh too, but that only made me laugh more. At this point, Jim and I were in full out, uncontrolled giggling. Scolding looks were on the faces of the whole Lipman family as I continued to ruin the sanctity of their holiday. For this and many other Lipman rituals and customs that I ruined for them, Irv good-naturedly renamed me the Shiksa. Is the Shiksa coming over for Hanukkah, or will she be celebrating Christmas? Little did I know that shameful Seder giggling would follow me throughout my lifetime. In my 40s, I met and became besties with Ruth, who practiced Judaism very near to, but not quite at the Orthodox level. She wanted us to celebrate Passover together, and although I knew this had potentially devastating outcomes, I consented because, well, I knew it was important to her. Although he wasn't present, my brother's face appeared to me each time it was my turn to read aloud. For goodness sakes, he could make me laugh and giggle telepathically. The pattern continued. My voice would quiver. I could imagine Jim getting revved up. I've got her now. Then before I knew it, suppressed giggles would burst into uncontrollable laughter, tears emerging from my eyes and inching down my reddened face. Deja vu. Ruth was not amused. I can't count the number of Seders I've been to since then. Just please know that each and every one of them was traumatic for me. I knew what would happen, no matter how hard I tried for it not to happen. And I know that wherever and with whomever I attend another Seder, no matter what my age is, I'm doomed.
Thank you, Francine. We all know your heart is pure. Our next story is A Grandmother and a Granddaughter by Joan Mulcahy.
It is early evening, and I am looking forward to hearing my doorbell ring. Gracie, my 24-year-old granddaughter, is coming to visit me. She is coming to ask questions about me, about my life. I don't want to tell her that when I was her age, I didn't much listen to old people. I was nice to old people, considerate, respectful. I would go to the store for them or help when needed. But I did not especially listen to them, nor did I seek out their wisdom. In the 60s, we had something called the generation gap, and I fell into that stupid belief, believing that the older generation could not relate to the younger generation. Either this generation is smarter, or my granddaughter is. My doorbell sounds like church chimes. I missed the sound during the early days of the pandemic, but it is back to ringing again. It's ringing. Gracie, it's so good to see you. Good to see you too, Grandma. Oh, Gracie, you look beautiful. Oh, Grandma, you look fantastic. I smile. Most people just say hello, but we always add how good we look. It's our way. After a bit of a chat, a kind of checking in, Gracie starts with her well-thought-out question. Grandma, I was wondering, what is it like for you to connect to the younger generation? Oh, Gracie, I love the younger generation. I don't know what I would do without them, or you for that matter. You taught me how to use Microsoft Word on the computer, and your sister taught me how to order prints from Shutterfly. And a millennium at Nordstrom's helped me pick out a black leather jacket on my 69th birthday. I think that jacket makes me look younger. For sure, it makes me feel younger. So I wear it every chance I get. And there's more. Gen Z showed me which ink to buy for my printer when I was lost in Office Max. And I marvel at how my 9-year-old granddaughter, your cousin, can walk into McDonald's and order on the kiosk in 1 minute flat. I think generations need one another, Gracie. I know I need the younger generations. I can't get to the finish line without them. Gracie smiles, then goes right at it again, my serious-minded, lovely granddaughter. Grandma, what is something in your lifetime that has become obsolete, something you miss? Oh, Gracie, I miss going to Sears, buying a TV, bringing it home and plugging it in, and it works. Just like that. No cables, no wires, no monthly bills. I miss simple. I really miss simple, bad. Grandma, I can't even imagine that. Last question. What is something you want to pass on to the next generation? Let me think a minute. What I would like to pass on are some things that I have learned that hopefully will make your life easier. First, remember to buy a black leather jacket on your 69th birthday. It's a good way to kiss the 60s goodbye and a hot way to welcome in the 70s. Next, remember that a woman with a great big smile is gorgeous and irresistible. Who doesn't like to be around a happy person? Let your smile shine every time you feel it. But the most important lesson that I would like to pass on, it's about love, Gracie. There is no such thing as going through life without your heart breaking. So remember this, hearts break, but hearts mend. My heart broke when your grandpa died. I was watching from the window the day Grandpa took you to the library. You were only 4 years old. You came home with 11 books about dinosaurs. Grandpa said to me, she loves dinosaurs, knows all about them, their names, their habitat, every single thing. We both recognized your intelligence, your ability to memorize and retain information. It couldn't be missed, Gracie. And I'm so happy you have that one memory of him. At least you have one. About hearts mending, bit by bit, mine mended. Well, it mended some. Well, it still has a broken piece on the right side. But my heartbeats just keep on going. Free, undeserved heartbeats. A gift. It would be a waste not to use them, wouldn't it, Gracie? After all, a butterfly can still fly with a few holes in their wings. Some birds can still fly with an injured wing. And a mended heart can still beat. Hearts mend, Gracie. Remember, hearts mend.
Oh, thank you, Joan. That's just beautiful.
Thank you.
Just beautiful. Next up, we've got Terry Veris with Banjo Billy.
Okay. It is finally Sunday, and the three of us get the go-ahead to pile into my parents' bed, my dad waiting with a smile on his face. Stuart, the eldest, Marshall in the middle, and myself, the baby of the family, jump excitedly, giggling as my father begins the rendition of the familiar song he made up about Banjo Billy. In the story, Billy takes his banjo, gets on his donkey or mule out in the desert where the tumbleweed and succulents thrive. He sings his songs to no one in particular. I'm Banjo Billy and I ride my burro and I sing my song. Of course, in the most important verse, Billy invariably falls off his steed right onto a cactus, getting long spine prickers stuck in his behind. We are rolled around in the bed and tickled while emitting squeals of delight and gales of laughter. Each spine is pulled out one by one. My mother looks on, thoroughly enjoying herself. After moving from LA to Evanston when I was nearly 7, Banjo Billy came out occasionally to sing his tunes. Years later, my mother became a primary school teacher and approached me to write and illustrate the story of beloved Banjo Billy to share with her students. I drew him in his glory, sitting on his mount, singing away, playing his instrument and falling into a saguaro cactus. To me, my finished effort seemed very stilted, lifeless, and amateurish, unlike the actual experience we had. It didn't seem like what a professional, well-illustrated children's book should look like to me. After Mom returned it, I eventually discarded it, which is so unlike me, practically a hoarder who regards creative projects especially as precious. By the time I was a young teenager, except for the future storybook, Banjo Billy entirely faded from our lives. You entered the dining room at your own peril on bill paying day. Piles of bills were stacked across the table while my mother and father verbally battled out the expenditures. If I knew then what I know now, I would have never had kids, stated my father in retaliation of his bill-paying life. He looked right at me when he blurted this out. I was both crestfallen and angry at his statement. We were such a disappointment. How is it fair to blame this all on us? To look back at it now, he was having a hard time at work with greedy, insensitive bosses. His second son had mental problems. And at the end of the day, no matter how good a person my mom was or how successful, she was still bipolar, not able to be aware of others' feelings in her manic mode and sometimes giving the silent treatment and withdrawing during her depressive phases. I realized my father must have also been depressed as hell. Your mother and I don't believe in God. How could God have let the Holocaust happen? Backlash. Mom looked embarrassed and reluctant to expose this assertion as her own. I need to remind you, these were choir singing, women's club clinging, lifelong and weekly involved with the community, synagogue goers. That's what we're talking about. My oldest brother said, when you die, they bury you in the ground and that's it. It's cold, it's dark, and it's over. Reflecting on this, I found it unsettling, like some existential books we read in English classes. In school, someone brought up the idea of reincarnation and how the energy on Earth remained constant, even though there were deaths of humans and animals, and how vibrations of the planet are measured and increase as time goes on. It made sense to me, and I embraced these concepts as good possibilities. My cousin, upon hearing this, claimed people accept the philosophies that help them get through life. Maybe she is right. Perhaps it has to do with the involution of our souls throughout our lifetimes. I'm not sure. Who knows? Still, I'd be having a perfectly fine day, yet negative thoughts would descend upon me, seemingly out of nowhere. I'd pray for these patterns of thoughts and feelings to stop and lift. In my 20s, I was able to try traditional therapy and also begin participating in alternative ways to heal. I joined in with therapeutic groups in evenings and on weekends to root out the demons within. There were the self-help co-counseling group, other groups which formalized training utilizing visualization techniques, visiting healers running organized weekend programs, a Native American shaman, the examination of the Zen koan or question weekend, Reiki training, network chiropractic work, precognitive re-education weekends, and many others. I seem to be in touch with an invisible, evolving spirituality advancing network. Eventually, a way to look at life in a more positive way pieced itself together. I also found profound meaning following a specific guru, Meher Baba, who has served as my guide since 1979. Sometimes it is still a struggle to stay positive, and that's putting it mildly. And tendencies are keen to overtake good intentions, but those strong and intact intentions eventually make a comeback when needed the most. Like Banjo Billy, I get back up on my steed and keep singing my song. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. Don't let those prickers get you. Next up, we have a storyteller who's going through the modern 12 labors of Hercules. That's all I'll say. Denise McIntosh with birthday cakes.
Thanks, Deb. Betty Crocker's picture book was my mom's Bible. Well, actually, it was a very low second place to her King James version, but Betty Crocker was almost as well thumbed. My mom was not a confident cook. Her lack of self-assurance in the kitchen was exacerbated by the fact that my dad worked in food service. He was a foodie before the term was invented. But regular family dinners and lunches and breakfasts fell into my mom's domain because A, she was female, and B, she was married with children. She had her own ways of subverting societal norms, but eschewing her proscribed domestic duties wasn't one of them. So we, the four of us, my dad, mom, brother, and myself, sat down at the kitchen table every night to regular rounds of hamburger stroganoff, Swedish meatballs, meatloaf, macaroni and cheese, and chicken a la king. Frankly, I think my mother would have rather done 1,000 other things than put family dinner on the table every night. Things like whitewater rafting, visiting the pyramids, parasailing in the Gulf of Mexico, hiking the Great Wall of China. I figured this was true because later in life, much later in her life, she did do all of those things. But, well, there she was, stuck in nuclear family norms. Mother had a companion to Betty Crocker, and that was a small, slender volume, more of a pamphlet really, that was all about decorating birthday cakes. Not just decorating 3-layer cakes, slicing and dicing those 3 layers into geometric shapes to make new shapes, which were then transformed through the magic of frosting and food coloring into recognizable characters and objects. A clown, a lion, a snowman, a sailboat. Baking those layers, mixing those frosting colors, shaping the characters, and everything done in secret to surprise the birthday person was probably the only time my mother was truly happy in the kitchen. She wasn't a creative cook, but her pamphlet showed her how to cut out the puppy ears and tail and paint the big eyes in its head, and she could always follow directions and a plan. When my brother and I were judged too old for a funny cake shaped like a mouse or a car, she still valiantly held up her self-imposed bargain and made cherry crown or German chocolate cakes with wrapped coins or little toys hidden in the slices. You had to be careful when you ate a slice of one of my mom's later cakes. The birthday baking stopped when my parents got divorced. Or rather, my mom's birthday baking stopped. Never one to let anything get in the way of a chance to cook or bake, and now freed of those pesky family and societal norms, my dad picked up the birthday cake baton. Family lore had it that he made his first cake at age 9. So for him, this was like riding a bicycle that he'd never even fallen off. His cakes were not always in 3 layers, and he never carved a sailboat or a snow person, but they were always delicious. And if you met my dad more than twice, then somehow your birthday would end up in his date book, and a birthday cake would likely arrive on your doorstep if you were not too far away. I was never too far away. Birthday cakes arrived on my doorstep even after I moved from Detroit to Chicago, fresh from the oven and none the worse for wear, even after a 6-hour drive in my dad's car. In 1996, 2 of my friends and I discovered that our birthdays were all pretty close together. We decided to throw ourselves a joint birthday party. However, none of us wanted to cook, so we came up with this plan. We would provide a live band and beverages, and everyone else would be invited to bring a garlic dish to share. I'm not sure how we landed on garlic as the star ingredient, but it's in cuisines around the globe and very few people dislike it, so it worked. It's worked for more than 2 decades. Thus, we became the Garlic Girls, and the garlic parties were born. This being a big time food event, not to mention my birthday party, my dad naturally drove over every year. With 3 garlic girls to bake for, he had an annual opportunity to bake 3 birthday cakes at once. Mine was always my favorite, spice cake, but the other 2 were always different. Maybe chocolate rum and coconut cake. Maybe chocolate raspberry swirl and a lemon poppy seed. 3 birthday cakes arrived in my dad's arms every year the night of the party. The year my dad died, the thought of store-bought cakes at the garlic party made my stomach churn and my eyes leak. I couldn't bear the thought of ordering from a bakery, no matter how high the recommendations. Frankly, I didn't know how I was going to make it through the night without a bite of my dad's spice cake. And then one night, a few weeks before the garlic party, I got a phone call from my friend Sarah, a member of my book club. I don't know what you're thinking about in terms of birthday cakes for the garlic party, she said, but the book club has decided to bake 3 cakes, if that's all right with you. All right with me? I was blubber at that news. I thanked her profusely and said a little secret thank you prayer to my dad for nudging birthday cakes into place at the party when I most needed them. 3 delicious cakes had their usual pride of place on the garlic party dessert table. I gratefully devoured a big slice of spice cake after we blew out the candles. 2020 would have been the 25th annual garlic party. But as we all know, crowded gatherings were verboten last year, not to mention maybe downright illegal. There's not going to be a garlic party this year either. Too many iffy variables. But somehow I know, with a little help from my friends and the spirits of my mom and my dad, I'll find myself eating a slice of birthday cake. Preferably spice, but I won't be picky. It doesn't have to be shaped like a tiger or a bicycle either.
Wonderful, Denise. And really, there are only 2 kinds of cake, good and better. Next up is Kelly O'Connell, so please give a warm listen to "Oh Christmas Tree."
Growing up, my Christmases were ho-hum. No, that's not even accurate. They were sad and lonely, and not at all a celebration. So once I had my own home and my own family, I pretty much went overboard in celebrating the holiday. I did everything to excess, a cornucopia of excess. So since everything had to be just perfect and spectacularly awesome, Our Christmas tree, the centerpiece of our celebration, had to be just perfect. We had just bought a small townhome just before my first child was born, and I was determined to have the perfect Christmas tree. Each year, the Chicago Tribune, yes, remember newspapers, listed all the tree farms in northern Illinois and southern Wisconsin. We had moved back from a year in South Carolina, where we had had a lovely southern pine for our first married Christmas. So this year, in our first home that we actually owned, I was crazy nuts to get the perfect tree. But mind you, I was 8.5 months pregnant at the time. So on a bitter, cold Saturday, we set out for Wisconsin to get that perfect tree. The first place only had Scotch pines and Norway spruce. No, I need a fir. I want a long needle tree, I said, almost in tears. It has to be a fir. So after consulting the Tribune article, which of course I had cut out of the paper, I found a gas station with a pay phone and called the 2 tree farms that listed firs for sale. Yes, we've got firs, they both said. Balsam firs, Douglas firs, Fraser firs, but they're going fast, so come now. I got back in the car and looked at my mild-mannered husband and said, well, it's at least another 1.5-hour drive. Okay, let's go, he said. Good thing we got an early start. I prepped him. Both guys on the phone said it's going to be expensive. Probably $80 or more if we want a big tree, like 10 or 12 feet. It's going to be like $80 or more. It was the year 1976. $80, huh? That was a lot of money. My husband David looked over at me as if I was nuts. I was totally nuts at the time. I think I was probably foaming at the mouth, but he knew better than to contradict his very pregnant wife. So off we went, tramped around the tree farm, looking at probably 10 or 15 different trees, trying to remember where each one was after viewing it. Outrageously full and tall trees, trying to figure out if we could get it atop our small Plymouth Valiant and into our living room. And then there was the lying on the frozen ground to cut it down. Not always an easy feat, but tremendously satisfying. And I gleeful that finally I had my perfect tree. As the years went by, we visited many different tree farms in Illinois, Wisconsin, and Michigan. While my first husband was alive, throughout my second marriage, and after my divorce, until my kids grew up and left home. It was always a frigid, expensive adventure, always a challenge to find fruit trees. And as my kids grew up with their own opinions of the perfect tree, there was lots of shouting and crying. No, this one. I like this one better. No, you always let him pick the tree. Mom, it's my turn this year. I'm cold. Do they have hot chocolate here? Let's just get a damn tree and go home. Why can't we just get a tree at the Optimist lot? Why does it have to be so big? I like the smaller ones. Well, you get the idea. And then there was, I told you to carry the saw. We did bring the saw, didn't we? Did we leave it back at the car? Where is the friggin' saw? Is this supposed to be fun? I'm too cold to have fun. Wait, what? Why does Mom get the final word on the tree? Because she's the mom. And now my sons, ages 44 and 36, go out each year to a Christmas tree farm, one with wife and my 2 grandsons, the other with wife and my granddog Benny, to find the perfect tree. They have said to me, each one has said, Mom, I am as crazy as you were in finding our perfect tree. We tramp around for what seems like hours until we can't stand each other anymore and wonder why we even have to celebrate Christmas. And then it happens. We find our perfect tree and all's right with the world. And as for me, now I live in a small senior apartment community where I'm not allowed to have a real tree. I have a small artificial tree that lets me show off my 50 years of ornament collecting. Maybe this will be the year I smuggle in one of those small live cut trees I see for sale every year with stand and all for 40 bucks. It won't be from the woods or a Christmas tree farm or even the Optimist lot. It will be from Mariano's or Trader Joe's. And all the while, I will be dreaming of those Christmas tree farms and hearing those small, sweet voices. Mom, Mom, I found it. I found the perfect one.
Beautiful story, Kelly. Thank you. Next up, we have Barbara Ketter with a story guaranteed to make you hungry, Pasties. You're muted, Barbara.
Okay.
Okay.
Sorry about that. Today is the day Mom is going to let me help make pasties. I'm so excited. I've gathered all the bowls and measuring spoons as well as the cutting board and rolling pin. Mom has gathered the flour, lard, onions, and steak. Barbara, use the knife to smooth out the cups of flour as you pour them into the bowl. Now use the scraper to get the last of the lard out of the measuring cup. I ask, is this the correct way to cut the lard into the flour and salt? Mom replied, until it's nice and crumbly. Now comes the hardest part. Mom shows me again how to make medium-sized balls of sticky dough. You start pouring cold water slowly in a circle and start rolling the flour mixture around to make a ball. More water, roll a little more, kind of like rolling a snowman. Pick up your sticky ball and plop onto a platter and refrigerate up to an hour. Now we start the chopping. I peel and chop the potatoes and garlic. Mom chops the onion and the steak. Now we take the dough out of the refrigerator and start to roll each blob after flouring the board and pin into the size of a dinner plate. Mom does the first one and I do the rest. On one half of the dough, you put the potatoes and the onions, and sprinkle the salt and pepper and garlic, and arrange a good size hand of steak on the top, making sure that no meat is overlapping. In the middle, you put a piece of crumpled suet. Now you bring the other half of the dough over to cover, resembling a half moon, and you crimp the edges shut. Now to shift the pasty onto the greased cookie sheet. Mom had to do all the lifting. My hands aren't big enough. And 3 pasties to a cookie sheet. Cook until the pasties are light brown around the edges, about 45 minutes at 400 degrees. I am so proud, but also very tired, as this has taken a couple of hours. I think back to the memories of my special dinners, picnics, and especially trips to Michigan to visit my grandparents. Mom would bake pasties every time we went to Michigan. We would stop at a park to have a picnic on our way up. Along with a jug of lemonade, we had a perfect meal. And when we arrived, oh, the wonderful time spent as a family with grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins. Every birthday and summer holidays were celebrated with pasties. One of our favorite places to go on Labor Day was the car races for the demo derby. We would get settled in and pull out our pasties individually wrapped in foil to keep warm and start to eat. Of course, everyone around us asked what smelled so good. Then they received the explanation of English pasties, which is when the English, Welsh, and Swedish immigrated to America. They settled in Upper Michigan. That's how they became known as Yoopers. These were hardworking Cornish miners in the 1870s and 80s. Their womenfolk got up early in the morning and made pasties, wrapped each one in a towel. The men put them in their shirts to keep warm as they walked to the mines to dig up the iron and copper. At noon, they would pull out their pasties, put the towel-wrapped pasty on their shovel over their gas lamp to heat it and eat lunch. Only back then, they used turnips with the potatoes and ground beef in place of the steak. Today, you will see pasty stands dot the roadways in the UP mining country, doing a sellout business to tourists who have discovered this great food. Some still make it with the turnips and ground beef. Bakeries make it with fruit like apples and peaches. I brought Michigan rhubarb home to grow in my backyard to make strawberry rhubarb pies, and every time we moved, the rhubarb moved with us. I never made less than 3 pies at a time. And don't let me get started on Grandma's recipes. To make a proper salmon loaf, you buy pink salmon in the can at the A&P, cheapest store, better than Piggly Wiggly. And you pick it to pieces and mix it with the rest of the ingredients. All the recipes read about this much, or a handful, or a pinch. After Grandma died, we brought home her recipe box, and we tried to decipher and rewrite some of her recipes. It was a hoot. I continued making pasties, and as my children grew and taught them as well, when my son married, it was now time to pass this tradition along to the 5th generation. I'm in the kitchen again with my daughter-in-law. Eve, would you start peeling the potatoes and chop to about this size? Then cut the steak in strips and cut to about this size. I gathered the rest of the ingredients and started cutting the lard into the flour mixture. Here, Eve, this is how you add the cold water into the flour and start to roll a ball. You try it now. Eve said, I'm having a little trouble with this sticky dough. Show me again. I roll another, adding cold water, continuing to roll around to get a medium-sized ball. Eve tries it again, and she does better this time. Eve does well at rolling out the dough and adding the potatoes and the steak, etc. Now fold over the top to make a half moon. Crimp the edges and lift onto the cookie sheet. 45 minutes later, we check the pasty to see if they are brown enough. They are. We cut a small hole in the crust and we take out the suet, add a tablespoon of butter and a tablespoon of hot water. Cover with a clean dish towel and let rest for 20 minutes. Eve received praises from the entire family.
Oh, sounds delicious every time I hear it. Thank you, Barbara. Our next storyteller is our very own Dorothy Soltis with Pandora's Box.
Thank you. Thank you. Everything was really beautifully read, people. I really enjoyed these pieces. I want a pasty. The family memories in Pandora's Box, sweet, sour, or sweaty, came to me recently in a day of mixed up weather. When shopping with Ma, before we left home, she always counted her money. Yes, we got enough for supper. Dare I ask for new shoes? It was true. Daddy got mad at me when I was a toddler. In fact, he slapped me more than 3 times one evening for jumping out of bed 3 times when everybody else was together reading in the living room. Pandora's box had entered my life. Next day, when he got home from work, I went up to him with my big brown baby eyes and guilted him. He saw how sad I was and soon softened, and we got all better. He offered me a mint and then a tiny share of bourbon. So nice. We sipped bourbon nightly until I could say thank you. My relationship with Mother was affected by my grabbing her sewing scissors and cutting the sticky summer hot hair that kept falling on my face. Her anger was tempered by believing she could create a curly lamb hairdo for me. Her attempt in using her stainless steel guitar-shaped curlers failed. My hair made them spring open. Ha ha. Her next effort was taking me to a barber for a severe square cut bob. I still loved her. I sniffed out the status of our angst-ridden family members. Ma was second to Papa, and the 2 boys were contrite and had to settle with her commands. I just was the girl who sat in a chair watching everybody. Ma, by repeating her favorite saying, "I want you to be independent," set my stage. Let them all think of me as a gift of unknown value. However, I knew that myself, really was my own business. And it was the thing that worked. I was told one of the brothers had real brilliance. I settled with being smart and looking for clues on how to have some part in family decisions as I got older. When finally on my own with a telephone and all of the pots and pans I needed, I allowed a little glory and set the clock for the next day and work. No smoking, modest drinking, happy, Pandora's box tied up and stashed away. Those Great Depression years were tough on all families, and I think it was universal among a lot of kids to notice how the responsibility to keep families together weighed upon their parents. And I believe that before great advances in technology came about, a hot fudge sundae was the wonder of those struggling years.
Thank you, Dorothy.
Welcome.
I get such a picture of you as a young person, declaring ownership of yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would love to have met you, that younger self.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for a wonderful story. Next up, we have a story by Norman Christofferson, and he has asked me to read it for him as his voice is giving him a problem these days. So this is called Whoosh. It was a typical Nebraska July day, hot, humid, and stretching seemingly forever without school or work on the horizon. We were of the post-independent pre-hormone years, leaving the house in the morning, stopping only for food until the streetlights came on and we had to be home. Free-range kids. It was just after the 4th of July, so naturally our thoughts went to blowing stuff up and making big noises. The necessity of obtaining gunpowder became paramount. 2 of us were more technically bent and had read about the Chinese invention and basic recipe for gunpowder. Simple: charcoal, sulfur, and saltpeter. The first 2 were easy, Saltpeter or potassium nitrate was more difficult. I hopped on my Schwinn Typhoon and headed to the drugstore. Oddly, I was not questioned about my purchase. Today, it would raise all kinds of red flags. Returning home, and with no internet recipe to go by, we guessed on the proportions of 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. In hindsight, not ideal, but effective. We grabbed a pie tin and mixed up our first batch and prepared to ignite our concoction. Not being totally stupid, we were careful as we approached, carefully with a lit match. Whoosh! Our experiment worked. Of course, there were unforeseen consequences. The ceiling was covered with black smoke, and the pie tin was melted into the linoleum countertop. Ignoring the smell of sulfur, we went looking for paint to repaint the ceiling. We had intentions of covering our tracks. Just then the parents came and we were ushered out. Although it was clear who the ringleaders were, we faced no consequences. I can only think there was a certain pride by our dads, the oldest sons of engineers and all that. There were comments about being careful with fire and combustibles, but no serious consequences. We didn't even have to repaint the ceiling. Years later, as a high school student in New York City, I described our experiment to my fellow students and got blank looks in response. It held the stark contrast between theoretical and experimental science to me. Both have their place, but experimental's more fun. Thank you for that story, Norman. I love it. Our next storyteller is by Mary O'Connell, and it's called Getting on the Bus.
Wielding her Ventricard, Susanna climbs onto the Clark Street bus for the short ride to school. Her sister walks to school, and Susanna could too if she'd get up a little earlier, but hey, the bus drops her a few blocks from within a block of her school, so why not? And in finding her seat on that bus, 12-year-old Susanna sits down in good company with members of my family who have been riding the CTA for about 100 years. Her mother, my daughter, Sarah, also took the CTA to school, though in pre-internet days, she didn't have a Ventricard, she used tokens. She'd ride the Red Line from Rogers Park down to downtown to get off at Randolph, go through the tunnel, get on the Blue Line, come up out of the subway, get off at Racine to go to Whitney Young High School on the near west side. No problem for a smart 13-year-old. Like my daughter and my granddaughter, I also rode CTA to school. Clad in my Catholic school girl uniform, I would get on the Western Avenue bus at Winnemac and ride it almost up to Howard Street to go to school. And when I went to college, I just went the other way, riding the Red Line downtown to Loyola. I remember how hard it was to make my 8:30 a.m. philosophy class in the middle of rush hour. And in later years, riding the Red Line to work, I got so frustrated with all the delays that I renamed it the FRL. And I'll leave it to you folks to figure out what the F stood for. But recently, my daughter Sarah, who also rides the Red Line to work, told me a story about how she was coming along on her way to work on time in the morning, and suddenly they stopped at Belmont, and the conductor got off and came into their car and irately ordered all the passengers to evacuate the car because, well, a fellow passenger had evacuated his bowels on one of the seats up front. So we may have to come up with a new nickname for the FRL. But the family record so far for CTA mileage surely goes to my mom, Susanna's great great-grandmother. In the early 1930s, you would see Cece giving the conductor a dime and getting 3 cents change on the Damon Avenue bus as she rode to high school, the Catholic girls' school that was near St. Ignatius on the near west side. Cece would be the redhead reading a book and quietly eyeing the good-looking St. Ignatius boys. Later, she'd take the streetcar to her secretarial job downtown, or go downtown to shop, especially on Monday and Thursday nights when Marshall Fields and the other stores were open late. One of my earliest memories is riding downtown with her one Saturday on those old Ravenswood, now Brown Line trains. I'd sit up front and look down as the cars went around the bend, screeching and turning, and I'd look down at the streets below. Cece, my mother, went on riding the CTA her whole life, watching her city as it changed. Once, after a trip on the Lawrence Avenue bus to my sister Kate's house, she remarked, "Sometimes I'm the only white lady on the bus. People get on, they're wearing turbans, they're wearing saris, they're speaking Spanish, they're speaking Chinese, and we all just ride along together. That's Chicago." And she always, always went downtown. I think it was her way to ward off loneliness and depression. She'd put on her sturdy shoes, grab her umbrella just in case, and hop on the Peterson bus to the Berwyn station to the Red Line to go downtown. Some of you will remember the story I told a while ago about the time she encountered a tap dancer on the CTA Chicago Avenue platform in the subway. But I've told that one before. Cece was in her late 80s at the time. There's another story about Cece as a young woman running to catch a streetcar, which pulled away, but then stopped and let her hop on. Another passenger said, "Wow, how do you rate your own stop?" And Cece said, "Well, the motorman is my father." Her father, John Lydon, Susanna's great-great-grandfather, was born poor on a farm in the west of Ireland. As a young man, he crossed an ocean and got himself a job driving a streetcar on the west side of Chicago, about 100+ years ago. When we were kids, Grandpa would come to Sunday dinner bringing leftover paper transfers. Some of you will remember those. And we would line up the dining room cars and dining room chairs, and we would play streetcar. My brother Dave would be the conductor, and the rest of us would get off and on as he called out the stops. It was good practice. We're city people. We like to know how to get around. And so does Susanna. She's on her way. Thank you.
It's just lovely. There ought to be an anthology. We just all ride along together. I love that story. Our final storyteller of the evening is Toby Landsman.
Thanks, Deb. Thanks, everybody. I was born bald 12 days after my cousin Paula, who was born with a full head of hair. Our mothers used to place us in the same baby buggy and roll down the street. I wonder, could hair envy have started so young? Give me a head of hair, long, beautiful hair. Well, I started to get hair not that long after. And then shortly after that, I got even longer hair. Long, thick, luxurious, wavy hair that I guess I would have loved if I thought about those things in those days, but it was hot when you're sick a lot of the time. And so they took me to have my mane shorn by Nate the barber. Nate was my dad's barber, and he had a barber shop on Division Street in Humboldt Park, walking distance from our apartment. Nate was a short man with an enormous personality and an amazing talent for playing the chardash. I would stop right here because I just love this music and the memory of Nate the barber with his violin. But he had hair that was thick and wavy, as well as all these other people. And his was wavy on his head, but also on his mustache, where he used wax that made it extra special. So I'd sit on a phone book on the luxurious red leather barber chair in his shop, a silky cape around my tiny shoulders, and he would snip, snip, snip my hair. And when he was done, he'd lift me up, put me down on the floor. I'd run outside where my father would be waiting and beaming, his arms outstretched as he shouted, "My son, my son." Dr. Hallaby, my allergist, not a barber, who had no bedside manner, told me that I'd lose my hair by the time I was 21. So at 21, I crossed paths with him walking downtown. And while I didn't approach him, I blithely flipped my luxurious hair and sneered as he walked by. Bald indeed. I always thought that I had straight, smooth hair, not wavy or frizzy. I grumbled when my hair would frizz up because that wasn't like it during humid weather. Over time, I realized that my smooth hair was perhaps aided or created by the fact that I'd blow my hair dry by hanging my head over and brushing my hair after I'd washed it, and then sleep on huge rollers secured by bobby pins every night. And then, of course, in the morning, some hairspray. Straight indeed. The importance of maintaining my hair goes back through the generations, I believe. My mom would talk about remembering her mother and valuing that her mother's hair was always neat and that her apron was always clean. This was through the times of the Spanish flu, World War I and II, the Depression, poverty. And my father's mother, she'd sit at the kitchen table after washing her hair with a glass of coffee and thick grounds in front of her. And she'd have a comb in it. And she'd take the comb with the grounds and she'd pull it out and she'd run it through her hair. And then she'd take the comb again and dip it into the grounds and comb her hair. And that was how she dyed her hair. Perhaps that ritual was what inspired my father's advice to my mother, who, when she was 40 and depressed, he said to her, "Dye your hair, go volunteer someplace." Mr. Compassion, right? But she did, and she became forever a redhead. Va, 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 voom, mama. And now, back to me. When I was beyond the talents of Nate the barber, my mom started taking me to her beautician. So one day, as preparation for an upcoming family photo, we went to mom's beauty shop. I made mom and the beautician promise that they would not cut my hair short. Repeat, not short. They promised. They lied. When she was done, I looked at myself in the mirror and I was devastated. Ugly, lacquered spit curls on my forehead. And my beautiful hair had been chopped off, and my hair felt stiff, a solid helmet of ugliness. I wept. My mom thought I was being silly and thought I looked lovely. Oh, my hair. When you were a girl, what would you have thought? if that's what you saw in the mirror. Well, I've gone through bald, boyish, flipped, braided, permanent waves for the time I was on ABC TV AM Chicago because of some work that I was doing. And I've had a blessed lifetime of hair that doesn't need coloring. This is me. I don't need coffee grounds or any other means. Yes, my hair is thinner and it's still frizzy, but it's still here. And so am I. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you.
And thank you, Deb, for being our fearless leader.
It's a joy. It's a gift I gift myself, I think. I want to thank all of you for your stories and for playing and working with me. And I want to thank Liam and Willa and Adrian for their work behind the scenes. And a special thank you for those in the audience, Michelle Coughlin, Connie, Cardi, Enid. I see y'all. So thank you. And Liam, any last words?
Well, this concludes our fall 2021 session of GeNarrations. So congratulations to all the storytellers who participated. These were some incredible stories. GeNarrations will be back the week of January 24th, and more information will go out about how to get signed up soon. So keep an eye out for that. But thanks everyone for being here, and I'm going to go ahead and end this live stream. Have a great rest